Hey guys, tonight we're sinking into the damp, dung-heated underbelly of 18th-century European gardening. Yes, really, with a tale of one wildly ambitious apprentice and the fruit that nearly broke him. You probably won't survive this, not because of danger, but because your eyelids might give out from the sheer, slow-paced splendor of horticultural obsession. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, tell me where and what time it is in the comments. I love seeing where this sleepy little time machine ends up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down the gravel path before dawn, boots half-soaked from last night's drizzle. The air smells like peat smoke and wet moss. You are 15, cold, and very much not destined for greatness, unless greatness can be achieved through mucking out greenhouses and pruning roses no one ever thanks you for. The estate you work on, Lord Elverton's Manor, is respectable enough. The sort of place where swans glide across artificial lakes and no one ever seems to eat in the dining hall. You're the son of a tenant farmer and technically an apprentice to the head gardener, Mr. Pomeroy, who smells like onions and yells like he's trying to wake the potatoes. But still, there's something in you that can't help watching the clouds move and wondering how a plant reaches toward light as if it knows something you don't. One morning, as the rest of the staff are fetching water or dodging the housekeeper's wrath, you pass the locked door to the orangery, the fancy glass structure where Lord Elverton keeps his tropical curiosities. You're not allowed in, which, of course, is precisely why you can't stop thinking about it. Today, though, the latch is slightly ajar. You glance left, then right. No footmen, no scolding matron, just birdsong and your own pounding heart. Inside, it's humid and still like the breath of some sleeping jungle. Vines trail from ceiling beams. Ferns crowd your legs, and in the center of it all, lit by a shaft of pale light like a crown on velvet, is a pineapple. You don't know what you expected, but this is ridiculous. It's squat, spiny, and utterly magnificent. Golden scales, tufty green top. It looks like a knight's mace decided to become a dessert. You walk around it slowly, reverently. You don't dare touch it. Partly because of the thorns, partly because, well, if fruit could sue, this one definitely would. This is the fruit that's been whispered about in the scullery. That the Duke in Kent threw a ball just to show off a single slice. That Queen Charlotte keeps under glass like a crown jewel. That some fool in London paid to rent just so he could pose with it at his dinner party and return it uneaten. It's not food, it's theater. And in this quiet, leafy bubble, one thought slips into your mind and refuses to leave. I could grow one. A laugh escapes before you can stop it. You have no training in tropical botany, no hothouse, not even a good pair of shears. You're the boy who once miswatered a melon so badly it turned gray. But something shifts. That pineapple, so smug, so triumphant, awakens a spark of purpose. You're not just going to tend roses anymore. You're going to crack the great fruity enigma. If they can grow pineapples in Yorkshire, so can you. Historically speaking, you're not the only one who's caught the fever. In 18th-century Europe, pineapples weren't just fruit, they were status symbols. Imported ones rotted on the journey. Locally grown ones, now those required hothouses, coal, manure beds, glass, and the stubbornness of 10 oxen. A single fruit could cost more than a coach horse. And still, aristocrats would crow about them at salons like they'd bred a unicorn. You whisper your vow aloud, silly as it sounds. I will grow one of my own. Naturally, this goal has several problems, starting with the fact that pineapples take about 2 years to fruit and don't enjoy frostbite. Also, you don't have a pineapple. But that night, as you lie in your straw mattress, you begin sketching plans in your head. How glass magnifies heat. How manure generates warmth as it breaks down. How perhaps, you could scavenge enough scrap to build your own little tropical paradise. This is the moment everything shifts. You don't sleep much. Your mind races with diagrams and dirt. Somewhere between dreaming and waking, a phrase repeats like a heartbeat. Grow the pineapple, grow the pineapple, grow the pineapple. You know, the way normal teens fixate on shoes or flirting. Historians still argue whether the pineapple craze was a genuine reflection of botanical ambition, or just a decadent, fruit-shaped peacocking contest among the aristocracy. Some say it represented the Enlightenment's thirst for discovery. Others argue it was just the 18th century version of buying an outrageously expensive handbag you never use. But you're not in it for fashion. You're in it because you've seen something strange and beautiful and you want to recreate it with your own hands. Even if no one else ever tastes it, even if it takes years, even if it smells funny. And that, honestly, is kind of lovely. Outside your window, the moon rises over the hedgerows. A fox barks in the distance. You roll over, pineapples dancing in your head like armored fairies. This won't be easy, but it will be yours. The next morning, you do not storm the orangery like a revolutionary gardener. You do what all dreamers with zero resources must do. You bide your time and eavesdrop. You start delivering tools near the orangery at suspiciously convenient hours. You linger when Mr. Pomeroy rants to his underlings about the delicate heating balance. You pretend to scrub the greenhouse glass while memorizing how the vents work. You are, in short, becoming a horticultural spy with a mop. Your main target, the heating system. This pineapple, this smug tropical monarch, survives in a structure known as a stovehouse. It's basically a glorified greenhouse with a hot temper. Beneath the tiled floors run flues connected to a furnace. Manure beds heat the soil, glass traps the sunlight, and someone, usually someone with a powdered wig and unlimited coal, pays for it all. But here's the thing, Lord Elverton isn't the gardening type. He's just a collector. He owns rare fruits the same way he owns rare Italian shoes. He likes knowing they're there. You, meanwhile, have stared so long at the pineapple that it's starting to haunt your dreams. Last night it had a face and called you by name. So when, on a wind-bitten Tuesday, the orangery door is left open again, your body walks in before your brain can object. It's warmer inside than yesterday. Damp, the smell of compost and citrus clings to the air. The pineapple looks exactly the same, untouched, somehow judging you across the foliage. You don't touch it, you're not that reckless. But you do crouch down beside the planter it sits in. You run a finger along the soil, warm, and you spot the brick floor's hairline cracks. Beneath this floor, somewhere, there's heat. Flues, probably, maybe coals, maybe magic, hard to say. You hear footsteps, fast, heavy. You bolt for the back entrance and dive into a hedge, arms scratched, face full of spider webs. Behind you, the gardener's assistant shouts something that might be your name, or might just be a sneeze. Either way, you're not sticking around. Back in the tool shed, you pretend to be deeply invested in reorganizing trowels. Your heart races. Your hands stink of dirt and jasmine, and your head is already sketching blueprints. That night, under candlelight in the cramped loft you share with two other apprentices, both snoring like exhausted cattle. You tear a page from an old ledger and begin to draw. You sketch a Linta stovehouse made of salvaged glass panes, a trench lined with bricks, manure beds like the ones you've read about in old horticultural manuals, the kind that claim the warmth of a well-managed dung heap rivals that of any sun. You smirk, it's a ridiculous sentence. You write it in the margins anyway. The next morning, you do not announce your plan. You begin collecting bits of broken glass from the bottle pile, chunks of brick from the collapsed garden wall, even the scorched wooden frame from last year's failed melon cold frame. It's all junk, but it's your junk. You stash everything behind the compost bins. No one goes there unless they're desperate or fleeing chickens. You work in secret, slipping away during lunch breaks and thunderstorms. Your fellow apprentices assume you're off brooding in the orchard again. Not entirely wrong. 3 weeks in, the framework is up. It leans slightly to the left. You tell yourself that gives it character, like a thoughtful dog. You layer in manure, then straw, then soil. You borrow a thermometer from the main greenhouse just to clean it, and spend 2 nights charting the heat distribution in your little structure. It's not ideal, it smells assertive, and the glass fogs up constantly, but it's warm. And inside, in the very center, sits your prize, a tiny, half-rotten pineapple crown you scrounged from the kitchen waste pile and coaxed back into greenish life. It's a gamble, a long, slow one, but you're already in too deep. Here's a fun historical footnote. In actual 18th century Britain, pineapple stove houses were wildly complex and competitive. Wealthy estates competed not only to grow pineapples, but to grow them first and bigger and sweeter. Gardeners guarded their manure mixtures like secret recipes. Some used old tanner's bark, others hot bricks. A few added urine, which no one likes to talk about, but well, it happened. Scholars still debate which technique worked best. Some argue the finest pineapples came from Cornwall, where seaweed compost helped regulate humidity. Others insist it was all about the flue design, how the heat circulated beneath the beds. Either way, success required obsessive attention and the occasional borrowing of rival secrets. That's historian speak for industrial fruit espionage. You, meanwhile, are too busy fanning your pineapple with a folded napkin to worry about historiography. Then comes the inevitable disaster. You are mid-shoveling when a shadow falls across your pine-glass paradise. Mr. Pomeroy. He stares, his expression, somewhere between confusion and fury, like a goose that's just been insulted. You open your mouth. No words arrive, just a small, terrified hiccup. What, he says, is this contraption? You try to explain that it's a hobby, that it's educational, that it might save the estate money on imported fruit. He cuts you off with a snort. You've wasted soil, you've stolen glass, you've burned good dung on this. He pokes the pineapple crown, which promptly wilts as if playing dead. You brace for punishment, suspension, dismissal, a lecture so long your ears fossilize. Instead, he sighs. A pineapple, is it? God help us. And with that, he turns and walks away. You blink. Was that permission? You're not sure. But you keep building. You don't speak to Mr. Pomeroy again for 2 days, which in apprentice time is basically a full lifetime. During this silent truce, you continue tending your pineapple with the fervor of a monk guarding a holy relic. You even name it, unoriginally but lovingly, Reginald. Reginald the pineapple doesn't exactly thrive, but he doesn't die either, which, frankly, feels like a win. You monitor the temperature every few hours. You log manure ratios in a notebook you've hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Pliny's herbal treatise. You hum lullabies while watering, because surely that helps. And then on a damp Wednesday, Pomeroy reappears. He watches as you adjust the vents of your homemade stovehouse. You nod politely, he grunts. After an eternity of silence, he mutters, "Straw under the roots next time, holds warmth better." And then he's gone. Just like that, the war is over. Kind of. You are not exactly promoted, but you are no longer a fugitive gardener. You're tolerated, occasionally advised. Once you think he even almost smiles at your setup, though he immediately sneezes, which ruins the moment. Around this time, something else changes. The other apprentices start visiting your plot. First, it's Will, who pretends he's just passing through, while clearly inspecting your manure layering like it's some ancient treasure map. Then it's Elsie, who straight up asks if you'll grow her a lemon tree next. You try to explain that's a totally different climate system, but she just hands you a seed and says, "You're clever, figure it out." Soon you have an audience. Not a crowd. This is still gardening, not theater. But a quiet respect begins to root itself in the soil alongside your pineapple. Meanwhile, back at the manor, the real pineapple, the prized Elverton fruit, goes missing. Not stolen, not rotting, served. You hear about it from the kitchen boy, who's so outraged he nearly sets his apron on fire. Waste of a good fruit, he huffs. Served it at dinner for that French ambassador, sliced it thin like it was gold leaf. You feel a twinge of something strange, not jealousy exactly, but loss. You never touched that fruit, not once, but it was your origin story, now it's just gone. Still, you have Reginald, and Reginald, by some miracle, is growing. Very slowly, he puts out a new leaf, then another. His base thickens. You catch yourself whispering encouragement, occasionally apologizing for bad weather. You worry that maybe you're getting a little too emotionally invested in a fruit, but then again, what else is new? One evening, while adjusting a cracked pane of glass, you hear a voice behind you. Is that a pineapple? You spin around and very nearly knock your head into the frame. It's Lord Elverton. Now you've seen him before at a distance, in velvet coats, with dogs that look like they judge people professionally, but never this close. He peers inside your humble setup, raises one eyebrow in a way that suggests either confusion or a migraine. You freeze. I heard about this project, he says slowly. Pomeroy mentioned it, said you debuilt a manure palace or some such. You nod, unsure if that was praise or the gardening equivalent of slander. Elverton crouches. He inspects Reginald without touching. This one's local, then. Yes, sir, you squeak. Rooted from a crown, took 2 months to sprout properly. Ahem. He stands, brushing imaginary dust from his lapel. Carry on. And then he leaves. You stand there for a solid minute, waiting for lightning to strike. It doesn't. Instead, a light breeze rustles the glass, and Reginald, basking in late sun, seems entirely unfazed by aristocratic approval. Historically, this kind of encounter was not uncommon. Some estate owners developed real affection for their head gardeners, even elevating them socially. Others treated them like expensive tools, valuable only if productive. There's scholarly disagreement about whether gardeners were ever truly autonomous. Some argue they had a surprising amount of leverage, especially when fruit was involved. Others say they were glorified servants in aprons. In your case, you're still somewhere in between, but Elverton's acknowledgement shifts something. Suddenly you have permission, not just to grow, but to dream bigger. You start redesigning your structure. You write to your cousin in Cornwall for seaweed samples. You beg Elsie for help with pest control. You ask Pomeroy if he knows anyone in London who's seen a Dutch pineapple house. To your surprise, he nods. Old Mr. Van Leeuwen, mad as a parsnip, built one with pipes, heated the whole thing from a central stove like a baking oven. Fruit came out sweeter, supposedly. You write it down. From then on, your little corner becomes a workshop, a lab, a dreamland made of dung, glass, and ambition. And Reginald begins to flourish. One scholar writing in 1782 claimed that the pineapple, if coaxed rightly, can sense its gardener's intentions. You're not sure about that, but Reginald does seem unusually responsive to compliments. You begin waking early, not because you have to, but because you want to. Your fingers are always dirty, your sleeves stained, your eyebrows occasionally singed, but you're happy. This isn't just gardening anymore. It's devotion. You wake one morning to the smell of frost. That particular kind of brittle air that sneaks under door cracks and turns your wash basin to a tiny, spiteful glacier. You groan. Not because of the cold, you've known worse, but because frost and pineapples are mortal enemies. You race outside, boots crunching over silvered grass. The sky's just beginning to yawn open with a pale blue shimmer. Birds haven't even bothered pretending to be awake. Your stovehouse stands where you left it, tilted, odd, glorious. You press your palm against the glass. Warm. Thank goodness. Inside, Reginald is undisturbed. His leaves are broader now, sturdy like the arms of someone who lifts buckets for fun. You kneel down, gently lift one frond, and there it is. A tiny bud. A crown. Your pineapple is crowning. You stare, not breathing, not blinking, not entirely sure you're not hallucinating. But no, it's real. A small, green, spiky dome rising from the center like a shy monarch peeking over a fence. You laugh loudly, unwisely. From somewhere behind the compost heap, a sleepy grunt. If you're going to marry that thing, at least invite us to the ceremony. Will. You wave him over. He sees the bud and whistles low. No one's going to believe it, he mutters. A pineapple from your junk heap. It's not a junk heap, you say automatically. It's reclaimed infrastructure. He rolls his eyes, but he smiles. Well, guess you'll be insufferable now. Yes, you will be. A few days later, Lord Elverton returns. This time he brings guests. It's awkward at first, rich visitors parading around the garden, pretending to be fascinated by anything that isn't made of marble or money. Then one spots your structure. Oh, what a charming little hut, she says. Elverton corrects her. That's my gardener's pineapple house, rather clever thing. My gardener's. You try not to react, but your face probably looks like it just received a knighthood and isn't sure whether to curtsy or pass out. The visitors crowd around. One older gentleman peers in and gasps. It's fruiting. They lean closer, they coo. Someone asks if they may paint it. You say yes, obviously, Reginald deserves art. Pomeroy stands off to one side, arms folded, wearing an expression that says, I always believed in this plan, despite much evidence to the contrary. And then out of nowhere, an offer. One of the guests is a botanist, or at least he calls himself one. He's got the beard and notebook to prove it. He asks if you've considered growing other exotics. Mangoes, perhaps, or cherimoyas. He says this like it's a simple suggestion, not a challenge that could drive a person to madness. You thank him, you smile. You nod like someone who is absolutely not going to spend the entire next month reading about mangoes. You are. Of course you are. There's a moment later when the guests have wandered off and you're alone with Pomeroy. He nudges Reginald's planter with his boot, not hard, just enough to shift the soil. You'll want to brace it, he says. As it grows heavier, pineapples tip easy, ungraceful things. You nod like chickens. He chuckles, a rare sound, like thunder in reverse. Don't get cocky, he adds. Too late. You're floating. Your success spreads across the estate like warm jam on toast. People start calling you the pineapple boy, which you pretend to dislike but secretly enjoy. Even Elsie stops pretending not to be impressed. She asks if she can grow flowers near your stove house, just for the warmth. You say yes. You would say yes to anything right now. You write to your cousin again, this time with diagrams. He sends back a scribbled note. Have you joined a cult or something? Technically, yes, a one-member pineapple cult. You're thriving. But as always, success invites scrutiny. A week later, you're summoned. Not by Pomeroy, by Elverton himself. The drawing room is larger than your entire childhood cottage. The windows are so clean you're afraid to breathe near them. Elverton stands by the fireplace, swirling something amber in a glass. Sit, he says, without looking at you. You do. You've done well, he begins. Very well, but... There's always a but. But, he continues, I've received a letter from Sir Montague Belcroft. He's hosting a horticultural exhibition. Exotics only, he wants entries. You nod slowly, carefully, like someone navigating a tightrope in fog. Elverton turns, I want you to take your pineapple. Your mouth dries instantly. Take it. Away from its stovehouse, from its precise microclimate, its straw bed and manure temple and blessed pane of foggy glass. That might kill it, you say, trying to keep your voice even. He frowns. Isn't that the point of all this? To demonstrate success. You've grown the fruit, let others see it. Your brain spins. You imagine Reginald collapsing in transit, dying under the eyes of powdered critics, being labeled a fraud pineapple. But you nod. Because what else can you do? This is the twist. This is when the fruit of your labor is asked to prove itself, not just to you, but to the world. Later that night, you sit with Reginald in the dark. You light a single candle and whisper a pact. If he holds on, if he survives the journey, you'll never make him do it again. He can retire in peace, live out his days sunbathing beside the strawberries. He says nothing, obviously, he's a fruit. But you feel understood. And so, you begin to plan for departure. You've never packed a pineapple before. Turns out, it's not like tucking a loaf of bread into a picnic basket. It's more like preparing royalty for a perilous voyage, only with more straw and an unreasonable fear of jostling. You begin by measuring Reginald's height, then his girth. Then you realize pineapples do not care for being measured and end up with 2 shallow cuts from the edges of his leaves. You wear them like badges, battle scars from horticultural warfare. Pomeroy helps grudgingly. He provides a cart lined with felt and an old wine crate lined with linen. You swear he mutters a tiny blessing under his breath, but he denies it later. I was swearing about the splinters, he insists. Elsie paints a label on the crate, Reginald, property of the garden. She draws a tiny crown above it. You want to hug her. Instead, you just nod and say, it's very official. The morning of departure is cold, damp, and entirely too serious. You escort the cart like a pallbearer in muddy boots. The manor cook comes out to watch. The stable boy salutes, tries to sneak a farewell sniff. Just want to know what success smells like. Reginald rides on a bed of straw, wrapped in a blanket that once held French linens. You feel like you're sending your child to war, or worse, a judging panel. The exhibition is in Bath, a city you've never seen, famous for its healing waters and questionable wigs. The journey takes 2 days, and you never once let the cart out of your sight. You sleep in a barn halfway there, curled around the crate like a paranoid raccoon. Every noise wakes you. Every creak is a potential pineapple assassin. Finally, you arrive. And, well, it's a scene. The Montague estate is larger than Elverton's. That's the first insult. The second is that everyone already knows it's larger. There's a sense of smug lawn about the place, like even the hedges are sneering. Servants direct you to a vast greenhouse, already filled with botanical weirdness. There's a mango tree taller than you, a potted banana plant swaddled like a newborn, a melon shaped like a star. One noblewoman has brought a fig that, according to her, weeps nectar if treated with Latin. And then there's Reginald. Small, handsome, resolute. You place him carefully on the display table. His leaves reach outward with practiced drama. His skin is golden, tinged with green. His crown is perfectly centered, like he's balancing invisible majesty. And yet, the murmurs begin almost immediately. Only one fruit. Not even imported. Homegrown, they say. You burn from the inside out. But then salvation. Montague himself appears. A large man with sideburns that look like angry caterpillars. He circles Reginald once, twice. He leans in. "Well, well," he mutters. "An English pineapple with symmetry will wonders never cease." You want to respond, something clever maybe, instead you just nod, possibly too many times. Montague beckons a scribe. Label this one local triumph, make sure that's legible. And just like that, Reginald becomes notable. The exhibition runs for 3 days. You spend all of them nearby, pretending to polish glass while eavesdropping. Reginald attracts curious glances. A painter sketches him. A poet writes a couplet, regal and round, born of dung, not crown. You're fairly certain it's meant as a compliment. There's scholarly debate, of course. One elderly gentleman swears the fruit must be Dutch. "No English gardener can ripen pineapples in January," he scoffs. You are halfway through composing a scathing rebuttal in your head when another botanist steps in. "Actually," she says, "there's precedent. Hackney, 1723, Lady Wither's gardener nearly produced twins." The first man harumphs. She adds, though hers were smaller, "Victory." And then, unexpectedly, Sir Montague approaches you. "You," he says, poking the air near your shoulder. "The boy with the pineapple." You nod again. The nodding may be a nervous tic now. "Would you consider staying?" he asks. "Running our glass house?" Your brain short-circuits. You stare at him, blinking like a confused goat. "Your lordship," you finally stammer, "that's very generous, but I've already got a house, and a stove, and a Reginald." He chuckles, "Pity, let me know if you change your mind." And just like that, you've been offered a new life. A better one, maybe, one with more tools, more resources, more everything. But it doesn't feel like yours. You return to Elverton's estate with Reginald nestled safely in straw, humming a victory tune composed entirely of sighs and relief. You expect a celebration. Instead, you return to silence. It seems, in your absence, the stovehouse roof collapsed. A windstorm. Pomeroy patched it, but the damage lingers. The ground is damp. The lemon seedling you planted for Elsie has wilted. You kneel in the wreckage, your festival laurels still in your pocket, and wonder if you've come back to ruins. But Reginald is home. You settle him gently into his bed. He leans slightly, just enough to look dramatic. You smile. You'll rebuild. That's the thing about growing things. You don't just start over. You continue. The rain doesn't stop for 4 days. That's the first sign your life has returned to normal. No exhibitions, no velvet ropes, no suspicious nobles sniffing fruit like it's perfumed handkerchiefs. Just damp socks and a collapsed roof. You spend the first 2 days sweeping water out of the stovehouse with an old broom and a prayer. By day 3, Pomeroy caves and helps reinforce the beams with a load of timber that probably fell off someone else's cart. You don't ask questions. He doesn't offer answers. It works. By day 4, the stovehouse is drier than your humor. Reginald survives the ordeal with typical pineapple dignity, mildly tilted, mildly annoyed, but intact. His crown droops a little, like a sleepy king refusing to abdicate. You apologize to him out loud. Will overhears and says, "You two should just get married and be done with it." You inform him that pineapples don't believe in marriage equality. He gives you a look that says, "That's not as funny as you think," which, honestly, makes it funnier. And then, just as the sun reappears, a letter arrives. Elverton's seal. You crack it open with a butter knife and scan the contents. It's an invitation. No, an assignment. There's a house party planned in 2 weeks. A summer gathering, important guests. Elverton wants you to prepare a pineapple feast. Not just a display, not just Reginald on a table with a napkin bib. No, this time he wants to serve it. You stare at the letter. Serve it. As in, eat it. Reginald. A panic rises in your throat. You imagine handing over your golden companion, watching a powdered duke carve him like a ham, slather him in brandy, and comment that it's a tad sharp for my liking. You go to the stove house, holding the letter like it's a death sentence. Reginald doesn't flinch, but somehow you can feel the betrayal hanging in the air like stale tobacco smoke. You're caught in a dilemma. Obey your patron and become a culinary footnote, or rebel and risk your position and your stove house. Pomeroy finds you pacing later that evening. You look like someone who's been asked to cook their dog, he says. You explain briefly, quietly. He doesn't laugh. You could always use the decoy, he says. You blink the what? The wax one from the winter fair. Elsie made it, said it was for practice. You don't know whether to hug him or scream. There's a wax pineapple, a double. An understudy. You race to the tool shed. Sure enough, behind a sack of peat moss and a rusted wheelbarrow, it waits. A slightly lopsided but passable Reginald replica. Elsie catches you mid-sprint back to the garden. You're not actually going to use it, are you? She asks. You hesitate, then nod. Yes, I am. She grins. I never said it was waterproof. Your grin fades. The next 2 weeks are spent in a frenzied ballet of repairs, polishing, wax-strip touch-ups, and practicing your most sincere face. Elverton visits once briefly, sees the replica, nods. Looks good enough to eat, he says. You agree. Too enthusiastically. The night of the party arrives. You wear your best shirt, will helps dust off your boots. Elsie gives the fake Reginald one final dusting and whispers, break a leg, or a frond. Guests arrive in droves. Lace, wigs, the works. Musicians play something that might be a minuet or possibly just a long apology on harpsichord. And then it's time. The replica is wheeled in on a silver tray, surrounded by ferns and grapes and one confused pigeon that wandered in from the garden and refuses to leave. Gasps. Applause. Someone faints or pretends to, you're not sure. A toast is made to British agriculture and the gardener with the golden touch. You bow slightly, modestly, like someone who has not just committed light food fraud. The chefs take the replica away to prepare the fruit. You know what's actually happening. They're replacing it with a pre-imported pineapple from London, pre-sliced, slightly underripe, probably French. The guests never notice. They swoon, they nibble. They declare it the finest pineapple ever tasted. Elverton's gardener has outdone himself, someone says. You sip lukewarm punch and smile like a sphinx. It works. You survive. Reginald survives. The wax is returned to the tool shed. You wipe him down and thank him for his service. He doesn't respond, he's wax. The real Reginald, still tucked away, now slightly wrinkled but safe. You make him a promise, no more public appearances, no more edible threats. From now on, he's just a pineapple. Your pineapple. You even sketch a little sign for the stovehouse. Reginald's retirement villa. Will sees it and snorts. You're not right in the head, you know. He's not wrong. But that's okay. Because you've pulled off something truly absurd. You've grown tropical fruit in England, lied your way through a feast, preserved your friend from being flambéed, and somehow people respect you more. It's ridiculous. It's magnificent. It's pineapple history. It's strange how fame creeps in. Not all at once like thunder, more like mist, quiet, persistent, and suddenly everywhere. One day you're just a lad talking to fruit, the next, people are peering through the hedge to glimpse your stove house like it's a shrine. It starts with a pamphlet. Some clever soul at the Bath exhibition writes about Reginald. He calls him a golden marvel from the soil of Devon. And you, a humble gardener with Promethean instincts. You have to look up Promethean. It turns out you're being compared to a Greek god who stole fire from the heavens and was punished by an eagle. You're not entirely sure how pineapples fit into that, but you'll take it. The pamphlet spreads. A few weeks later, a letter arrives addressed to the Pineapple Man. No name, no title, just that. It gets to you anyway. Apparently that's enough. You open it carefully like it might explode. Inside is an invitation from a lady in Bristol who's heard of your horticultural feats and wants you to advise her estate on tropical ornamentals. You chuckle at that. Tropical, in Bristol, sure. But still, more letters follow, some from curious nobles, some from hopeful gardeners, and a few from people who think you might be able to grow a strawberry the size of a child's fist. You don't reply to that one. Elsie becomes your unofficial secretary, sorting the letters into 3 piles: sane, questionable, and definitely cult. Reginald watches from the corner of the stovehouse like a proud mentor. You tell him he's gone viral. He doesn't react, but you sense he's smug. You try not to let it change you. But it does a little. You walk straighter. You speak with more confidence. You find yourself referencing soil acidity at dinner unprompted. Will rolls his eyes and calls you Lord Compost. Then the society comes calling. The Royal Horticultural Improvement Society of England and beyond, a name so long it barely fits on the envelope, wants to interview you. A Mr. Thistlethwaite, to be specific. A man so obsessed with plants that rumor says he once tried to marry a rhododendron. He denies it, vigorously. Thistlethwaite arrives on a Thursday. He wears a coat with more buttons than sense, and carries a notebook already half full before you've said a word. Describe the humidity levels of your stovehouse, he says, the second he steps inside. You blink, moist. He writes it down like it's gospel. The interview lasts 4 hours. You cover temperature ranges, manure layering techniques, and the emotional state of Reginald, quietly regal, bordering on aloof. He nods, scribbles, and occasionally mutters things like fascinating or blasphemous, but fascinating. At the end, he closes his book. Well, he says, you're either a genius or a lunatic, possibly both. You thank him. A month later, the Society publishes an article titled, "The Reginald Method, Domestic Pineapple Cultivation in the British Climate." Your name is spelled wrong, but you don't care. You've got a method now, an approach, a legacy even if it's written in slightly smudged ink. Elverton, to his credit, starts referring to you as my head gardener. You're the only gardener, but it still feels official. He even hosts another garden party, this time in your honor. You're introduced to guests with phrases like the pineapple whisperer and the man who turned dung into gold. One lady insists on touching your hands. I just want to feel genius, she says. You let her. They're calloused, damp, and smell faintly of peat. She swoons anyway. And yet, success has its drawbacks. For one, your privacy evaporates. You start finding strange footprints near the stovehouse. Once a tuft of powdered wig caught on a branch. Someone's been snooping. Then there's the rivalry. Sir Montague, not content to be merely impressed, has taken to competing. You hear rumors of his new glasshouse upgrades, heated water pipes, rotating window slats, even imported parrot droppings. He's gone full agricultural arms race. He hosts an exhibition, invites you personally. You decline. Politely. With a note that reads, Reginald sends his regards, but he is not touring at present. Yours horticulturally. It's petty. It's perfect. Elsie laughs for 3 straight minutes. Meanwhile, Reginald continues to age. His skin darkens slightly, his scent grows sweeter, richer. You know he's nearing the end of his prime. It's a strange thing, watching your greatest creation ripen past its peak. You consider preserving him somehow, maybe pickling, maybe taxidermy, but the thought of Reginald stuffed and glass-eyed in a museum feels wrong. You decide to let him be, to simply exist. One day a small boy sneaks into the stovehouse, son of a guest, cheeks smudged with jam. He sees Reginald and gasps. "Is that real?" You nod. He whispers, "It's magic." You smile. And for the first time in months, you believe it again. Not the fame, not the method, but the miracle of coaxing something impossible from the soil. The stubborn joy of growing sunshine in a stormy land, of giving life shape and sweetness, and sharing it quietly, humbly with the world. Or maybe just one kid with jam on his nose. Autumn creeps in on quiet feet. The mornings are misty now. Dew clings to the stovehouse windows like a polite ghost, and the garden turns that soft, bruised gold that only happens in October. The kind of weather that makes you want to speak in poems, or at least in fewer syllables. You find yourself spending more time with Reginald. Not working, not adjusting vents or checking soil moisture or calculating sun angles. Just sitting, sometimes with tea, sometimes with silence, occasionally with Will, who brings 2 mugs and no conversation. He never looks directly at the pineapple, but you know he's started nodding to it when he walks past. A quiet kind of respect. You've become something of a curiosity, even within the estate. Not mocked exactly, just observed. Like an antique clock that somehow still ticks. Elverton, surprisingly, leaves you alone. Perhaps your recent celebrity has inoculated you from further interference. Or maybe he's just moved on to breeding oversized roses. He started calling them emotional cabbages. You don't ask. But one day, something changes. You receive another letter, this one from the Botanical Society of London, hand-delivered, sealed in green wax. They want to borrow Reginald. Just for an exhibit, a 3-day event. Scientific minds, they say, gentle handling, full credit, prestige even. You stare at the letter long enough for Elsie to threaten burning it. "It's just 3 days, you murmur. "He's not a timeshare," she replies. The idea needles you. On one hand, it's recognition of the highest sort, scientific validation. On the other, you can't shake the image of Reginald surrounded by glass cases, poked at with gloved fingers by men who don't even like fruit. You spend the night thinking it over. You weigh the options. You ask Will, who just says, "Would you let me be carted off to London for 3 days?" No, you admit. There's your answer. Still, you consider, harder than you'd like to admit. And then, quite suddenly, Reginald decides for you. He begins to rot. It starts at the base, a soft patch darkening slowly like bruised velvet. The air in the stovehouse turns faintly musty, sweet but decaying. You panic. You adjust temperatures. You move him to a cooler corner. You even attempt a desperate bracing maneuver with wire mesh and an old hatbox lid. Nothing works. He's simply ripening naturally, inevitably. Elsie confirms it with the air of someone delivering bad news from a physician. He's going soft. You nod. It's time. You don't cry, not exactly. You just sit with him for a while, remembering. The frostbitten seedlings, the sneers from Montague, the great wax deception, the parade of nobles who thought pineapples were hats, weapons, or aphrodisiacs. And you, just a gardener with too much time, too much curiosity, and too little sense to know when something wasn't supposed to work. It did. But now it's ending. You hold a private ceremony, No music, no speeches, just a soft shovel and a patch of soil beneath the old fig tree. You place him gently, crown up like a little sun, and cover him in layers of earth and mulch and memory. Will watches silently. He hands you a tin cup of watered-down brandy afterward. You sip. It tastes like old boots. You toast anyway. To Reginald, King of the Garden. Elsie carves a tiny wooden plaque. It reads, "He did not yield, he fermented." You place it by the fig tree and smile. The stove house feels emptier without him, not just physically, spiritually in the oddest way, like losing a roommate who never spoke but always left the kettle full. You don't stop gardening, of course. There are always other plants, other fruits, but it's different, quieter, more measured. You try growing a mango next. It dies in 2 weeks. You name it Gerald and bury it next to Reginald with less ceremony. But something else starts growing, too. Letters keep arriving, people asking for advice, children sending drawings of pineapples with tiny faces. One girl writes that she named her goldfish Reggie. You laugh genuinely for the first time in weeks. Then a young woman arrives from London, apprentice botanist, wide-eyed, ink-smudged earnest. She asks to study under you. You look around at the patchy stove house, the cracked tools, the cup of compost tea, and wonder what she could possibly learn here. Then you remember. Reginald grew here. And that's enough. You accept. She moves into the spare shed, names it the Root Bungalow. You don't question it. Youth needs to name things. Under her care, the stove house warms again. Not literally, it's still drafty, but energetically. You find yourself drawing up new soil charts, sketching airflow diagrams, getting interested again. You plant another pineapple, not in Reginald's spot, somewhere new, a different pot, different soil. You name it Clement. You don't expect him to succeed. But that's how these things start, isn't it? It's not that you've forgotten Reginald. It's just that Clement has his own personality. A little standoffish at first. His leaves come in sharper, more angular. You joke that he's emotionally withholding. Elsie calls him the introvert fruit. Will suggests therapy. Still he grows. Slowly, hesitantly, but undeniably. The young botanist, her name is Ada, keeps a meticulous log. Temperatures, soil samples, barometric pressure. You meanwhile go by gut, sniff the dirt, taste a leaf. Listen for that odd musical tension in the air when something is going right. She thinks your methods are absurd. You think hers are exhausting. But you both make it work. Together you rig a better watering system. Fix the stovehouse roof with a patchwork of glass and elbow grease. Try out a different layering of compost, seaweed, sheep dung, and a risky experiment involving pulverized oyster shells. Historians still debate whether those oyster shells helped or hindered pineapple growth in 18th century England. Some argue they added necessary trace minerals. Others say they introduced mold spores. One scholar insists the whole theory is a fruity distraction from serious horticulture. That's his actual phrase. He has no friends. Meanwhile, back in your little patch of improbable paradise, Clement inches toward viability. Your hands remember the rhythms, the early checks before the sun breaks, the way your breath fogs the glass as you lean in, inspecting the first glimmers of a fruitlet. You whisper encouragements, half sarcastic and fully sincere. I see you, you pointy little overachiever. He doesn't answer, they never do. But he grows faster than Reginald, more confidently. The stove house stays warmer now thanks to Ada's modifications. You suspect Clement might reach maturity in a year less. Maybe more, maybe not at all. That's the gamble. Outside, the world moves on. Pineapples are no longer the luxury item of the elite. A few greenhouses up north have begun selling slices to curious travelers for 6 pence a taste. You once see a pineapple-embroidered waistcoat in a London shop window. It makes you feel odd, proud, dispossessed, slightly amused. Fashions change, fads fade, but the act of growing them, that part you now realize, is what really mattered. The rest was noise. Lace and carriages and pamphlets written by men with too much ink and not enough dirt under their fingernails. You return to the soil. Clement keeps rising. One morning, Ada bursts into your kitchen before dawn. She's holding a measuring stick and a wildly inaccurate sketch. She's beaming. "He's reached optimal diameter," she says. You spit tea into the hearth. You rush to the stove house in your nightshirt. There he is, your second miracle, shorter than Reginald, paler in color but unmistakably full. Ready. You sit on the stool. Same one as always. Same corner. Same thin sunlight filtering through the soot-streaked glass. Clement doesn't glow the way Reginald did. But that's okay. He doesn't need to. He's not a replacement. He's a sequel. And you're no longer just the pineapple whisperer. You're a mentor now. A reluctant one, but a real one. Ada rattles off potential improvements, root aeration, secondary vents, maybe even, God help you, a public demonstration. You nod, smile, pretend to listen, half do. Your mind drifts back to the start, to the letter that brought you here, to the stink of seaweed and the glares of powdered men, to the feeling of placing that tiny crown in the dirt and believing, absurdly, that it might work. Oh, it did. And now here you are, still standing, still growing, still deeply unsure whether pineapples belong in Devon. But you've made peace with the absurdity. In fact, you've learned to love it. After all, what is gardening if not stubborn optimism? A refusal to accept that the world is just weather and weeds, each seed a small act of rebellion against inevitability. And pineapples, well, they're just the spikiest rebellion of all. Spring slides in like a cat through an open window, quietly and with a faint whiff of mischief. Clement is in full form now. His skin has turned golden at the edges, a sun-kissed promise. The stove house smells like overripe fruit and damp mulch and something else, anticipation. Ada hovers. She's taken to sketching him from different angles, labeling parts of his anatomy with borderline offensive scientific enthusiasm. She even drafts a scale diagram titled "The Comparative Geometry of Rebellious Fruit." You hang it next to Reginald's plaque. Outside, life continues its slow unravel. More estate guests stop by the stove house. Not just bored duchesses this time, though a few of them still try to wear Clement as a hat. You get visits from scholars, travelers, even a mysterious Frenchman who claims he's seen a pineapple grown in a cave. You suspect he's confusing it with a turnip, but he seems happy, so you let it go. One day, a delegation from the Royal Society arrives. Not just a letter, people. They come with boots and notebooks, monocles and tea flasks. They ask questions like, "And what emotional resonance do you ascribe to the choice of compost layering? And would you be willing to publish your techniques under a pseudonym for editorial integrity?" You blink, then point to the corner. That's the manure bucket. It resonates quite emotionally in summer. They don't laugh, but Ada does. After they leave, having declared Clement a botanical curiosity of considerable merit, you and Ada share a rare moment of stillness. She brings out 2 tiny glasses of raspberry cordial, which tastes like optimism and mild regret. You raise a toast to successful accidents. She clinks her glass and adds, "And to stubborn gardeners." The next week, something changes. A letter arrives, heavy parchment, stiff envelope, red wax seal. You recognize the crest. It's from the Earl himself. Not Montague, the actual Earl. The man who technically owns the entire estate, and whose shadow has long loomed somewhere between theoretical and omnipresent. You don't expect much, but the letter is generous. He's heard of your work, your exemplary horticultural advancements. He's requesting, no, inviting you to present Clement at the next royal banquet. You laugh so hard your tea comes out your nose. Present a fruit at a banquet like an eligible debutante. You show Ada, she doesn't laugh. She's already making plans, sketching crates, prepping climate control boxes, designing a collapsible viewing platform that she insists can double as a birdhouse. You stare at Clement. He doesn't flinch. The banquet, it turns out, is held in a massive hall near Bath. High ceilings, marble columns, one of those rooms that makes everyone whisper even when they mean to yell. You and Ada arrive with Clement packed tighter than a scandalous secret. Will insists on coming too, though he refuses to wear anything fancier than a brushed coat and clean boots. The crowd is staggering. Dukes, philosophers, people who say things like vestibule and mean it. They've brought their own curiosities, mechanical spiders, a six-legged goat, a man who plays the violin with spoons. You suddenly feel underdressed and slightly fruity. Clement, however, steals the show. People gather around, murmur, sketch. One old woman starts weeping softly, muttering about the return of Eden. Someone else asks if they can borrow a leaf for divination purposes. You politely decline. You're offered a medal. You refuse it. Then they offer cake. You accept that immediately. As the night winds down, you watch Clement gleam under chandelier light. He looks satisfied, or maybe that's just projection, hard to tell with pineapples. Back home, the stovehouse feels warmer. Not temperature-wise, emotionally. Clement continues to ripen. And you know what comes next. Another farewell. Not like Reginald, this one will be public, celebrated, shared. You plan the harvest with Ada. She insists on a ceremony, Will offers to build a podium. Elsie makes a banner that says, "Fruit happens." You harvest Clement on a rainy Tuesday. The cut is clean. The smell is overwhelming, sweet, earthy, almost peppery, like tropical defiance. You host a feast, not a royal one, just yours. Gardeners, locals, kitchen staff, even Elverton, who admits he once tried to grow strawberries and failed miserably. Everyone gets a slice. It's the best thing you've ever tasted. Not just because of the fruit, but because of what it took. Years, weather, failure, ridicule, stubbornness, hope, and somewhere between the compost and the ceremony, you realize something. This was never really about the pineapple. It was about possibility. You keep the crown, not because you think you'll grow another necessarily, but because it feels wrong to throw it away, like tossing out the last page of a novel before you've even read it. So you plant it, gently, reverently, with the care of someone who's learned not to expect results, but to treasure the process anyway. Clement's little crown joins a row of odd experiments now lining the edges of the stovehouse. Some are pineapple tops. Others, well, one might be a yam. No one remembers who put it there. It's sprouting something vaguely aggressive. The estate moves on. Ada receives a letter, an offer to study at a university abroad. She dithers for 2 weeks, drawing the same schematic of root systems over and over again. Then, finally, she packs up her notebooks, her tools, and a suspiciously large jar labeled pH Mystery Mush. You see her off at the gate. She hugs you. You'll keep growing weird things, won't you? Only the weirdest. Will takes over the daily chores in the stove house. Turns out he has a surprisingly delicate touch for pruning. Elsie knits a tiny fruit hat for morale. It's never worn, but it's hung near the window like a sort of horticultural mascot. You fall into a quiet rhythm. Wake. Waters. Watch. The stove house becomes more than just a greenhouse. It's a kind of sanctuary now. A soft, humid confession booth where leaves and thoughts unfurl slowly. One day, a traveling merchant stops by. He's selling trinkets and rumors as usual. But this time, he carries a cutting, rumored to be from the fabled black pineapple of Antigua, supposedly sweeter, denser, and faster to mature. You're skeptical. You buy it anyway. Why not? Planting something bizarre is now basically your love language. Weeks pass. Months. Clement's spot in the stove house remains empty. You tried filling it with a chair once, but it felt disrespectful, so you leave it be, a hollow throne of compost and memory. Then one morning, you receive another letter. This one has no wax seal, no crest, just your name in a familiar, loopy script. Ada. She writes from Italy, says she's discovered a bizarre monastery where monks grow cucumbers upside down to improve spiritual airflow. She's convinced it's nonsense, but can't stop watching. She closes with, "Miss the fruit, miss the stove house, miss your sarcasm most of all." You place the letter next to your pineapple knife. It fits there somehow. Reginald and Clement, by now, have faded into a state legend. New guests ask if they were real, if the carvings in the gatehouse are accurate, if the stove house is open to the public. You respond with vague nods and complicated shrugs. Let them wonder. The Earl sends another letter, this one requesting your presence at a lecture in London. He wants you to speak about botanical diplomacy, whatever that means. You decline. You've said everything you need to say with fruit. One morning, a pigeon lands on your windowsill carrying, of all things, a ribbon. It's Ada S. You don't know how the bird got it. You suspect she trained it. You suspect she didn't. You suspect you'll never know. You hang it on Clement's empty shelf. Then you go check on the black pineapple cutting. It's grown 3 inches. You grin. Historians still debate whether the black pineapple of the Caribbean actually existed in the form described by 18th-century travelers. Some claim it was a regional variation. Others believe it was entirely fabricated by merchants to increase prices. A few fringe scholars argue it was a metaphor for imperial guilt. That last theory has its fans, and a surprisingly detailed pamphlet. But you just want to see if it grows. Because here's the thing. You're no longer trying to impress anyone, not Montague, not the Earl, not the ladies who think fruit should smell like perfume and not like earth. You grow because you like it. Because it reminds you that absurd things are still possible. And because, sometimes, absurdity is exactly what the world needs. So one foggy evening, you light a candle in the stove house. Just one. The flame flickers across glass panes and curling leaves and the ghostly shape of another crown, half submerged in soil. You sit. You wait. You dream of fruit. You start keeping a journal. Not the kind with dramatic sighs and tragic metaphors, but something between a weather log and a love letter to leaf textures. You title it, Mildly Confused Reflections on Tropical Agriculture. Entry 1, Black pineapple continues to resemble a suspicious thistle, maybe plotting something. Your handwriting is getting better. That's how slowly things are going. You're developing penmanship out of sheer chlorophyll-induced boredom. Then, just as you're considering taking up embroidery or marmalade as a spiritual outlet, there's a visitor. Not a lord, not a merchant, not even a nosy duchess with too many opinions about soil. It's Ada, standing in the stovehouse doorway, holding an umbrella and wearing boots covered in Roman dust. She's back. You nearly drop a tray of seedlings on your foot. Turns out her studies in Italy went well, very well. She's been offered a post at a botanical institute. She says she might take it, might not. Depends on the state of your mulch. I missed real plants, she says, and real people, and your deeply underwhelming jokes. You smile, then frown. Because the stovehouse isn't quite the same. It's tidier now, yes, but quieter. The kind of quiet that feels more like an ellipsis than a period, something unfinished. Ada notices, she always does. So she digs in immediately. Literally. Within hours, she's already repotted your experimental sweet potatoes and started arguing with Will about pH ratios. Elsie knits her a new pair of gloves. Will bakes her a cake that's mostly edible. And you find yourself breathing easier. That night, you and Ada sit in the stovehouse, watching the condensation bead on the glass. Outside, the rain patters like someone gently disagreeing with the ground. You bring out the cordial. She brings out a story. Apparently, there's a small island off the coast of Madagascar where they grow pineapples in hollowed-out gourds, claiming it enhances the fruit's auric integrity. You're skeptical. She's tempted to go there next. You toast to integrity anyway. The black pineapple, still growing. Now roughly the size and temperament of a cranky grapefruit, you're cautiously optimistic. You start seeing pineapples in your dreams again. But they're different now. They're not perfect. They're bruised, stubborn, sometimes lopsided, but they still grow. One afternoon, Ada asks, "Do you remember when you used to care whether the Earl liked your fruit?" You snort. "I remember when I cared whether my compost smelled poetic." Did it? No, it smelled like boiled regret. She laughs, that sharp, clear sound that always makes the stovehouse feel more like home. Later, you come across a visitor's journal in the estate library. An anonymous traveler who passed through the area and wrote of a strange stovehouse where fruit is treated like royalty, and the gardener wears his melancholy like a waistcoat. You're flattered and a little offended. You don't even own a waistcoat. You tear out the page and keep it, just to remind yourself how far you've come. Historians argue whether the pineapple craze in Europe was rooted more in imperial exoticism or genuine horticultural passion. Some say it was all about power, owning what others couldn't. Others think it was aesthetic obsession gone rogue. And then there are a few scholars who whisper that the real reason pineapples mattered so much was because they were impossible. Until someone made them possible. That's what you think about now. Not wealth, not fashion, but defiance. Small, leafy defiance. You and Ada decide to build a new bed for experimental cultivars. You call it the fruit of questionable intentions section. She approves. Will contributes 3 unlabeled seeds he found in his sock drawer. You plant them with ceremonial confusion. Life isn't grand anymore. It's better. It's composted, replanted, weathered, watered. And somewhere in the back of the stovehouse, a new pineapple begins to bloom. You don't name this one. Not yet. You're learning that not everything needs a story. Some things just need sun. You wake up to find Will standing outside your window with a shovel and a suspiciously proud expression. It's sprouting, he says. You blink at him, not entirely convinced you've left the dream realm. What is? The black pineapples. You throw on your least respectable slippers and follow him barefoot across dewy grass to the stovehouse. And sure enough, Nestled in the most indecisive soil you've ever nurtured, the little thing is pushing up a spiky tuft of green, bold, jagged, and unmistakably alive. You stare at it like it just said your name. Ada joins you moments later, carrying a notebook and still brushing sleep from her hair. Is it? You nod, it's real. There's a pause, then a chorus of utterly unnecessary cheers. Will does a victory lap around the mulch pile. Ada writes "it lives" in her notes, underlining it 3 times. Elsie brings celebratory tea and a baked good that strongly resembles a shoe but tastes far better. You name the new pineapple Echo. Not because it's a tribute to Clement, but because it feels like one. A soft reverberation. A nod to everything that came before: triumph, failure, sugar rot. The stove house becomes a hive of activity again. Visitors trickle in from nearby towns, drawn by rumor and the possibility of free marmalade samples. They marvel at Echo's unlikely birth, some making breathless comments like "it's a sign," or "this proves my pineapple calendar is accurate." You smile, nod, and pretend you understand. And then one day, someone important arrives. Not the Earl, not Montague. Certainly not the Prime Minister who once mistook a kumquat for a pinecone. No, it's an older woman dressed plainly, eyes sharp as a rake. She introduces herself as Miss Percival, botanist, editor of the Colonial Horticultural Review, author of the delightfully niche book Sunlight and Stubbornness, Tropical Fruits in the Northern Mind. She's heard about Echo. "May I?" she asks, stepping into the stove house with a reverence that borders on religious. You gesture toward the plant. Miss Percival leans in close. She doesn't speak. She simply observes for a full 5 minutes. At the end of it, she straightens up, pats the rim of the pot, and declares, "It's the ugliest pineapple I've ever seen." Ada snorts tea out of her nose. But Miss Percival isn't unkind. She's just honest. And after a few minutes of technical questions and soil-related compliments, she pulls out a thin sheaf of papers. "I'm compiling a final edition of my journal. Would you consider writing something for it?" You blink me. "Don't be modest," she says. "You've done the impossible." You look at Ada, she shrugs. She's not wrong. "So you do." You write a short essay, 3 pages, double-spaced, with plenty of margin doodles. You title it, "On Growing Things That Shouldn't Be Grown." It's part history, part personal failure montage, part love letter to tropical absurdity. Historians still debate whether such essays, published in niche horticultural journals, had any real impact on the broader cultural view of tropical imports. Some say yes, they softened the imperial gaze. Others argue no, they were just eccentric gardeners talking to themselves. Either way, it feels right. Echo keeps growing. No faster than usual, but with the quiet confidence of a fruit that knows it's the center of attention. Ada suggests grafting, Will suggests poetry, Elsie suggests a tea cozy for warmth. You ignore all of them and just keep watering. One evening, as you sit by the stove house door watching the sunset smear itself across the sky like melted marmalade, Ada says, "You know, we never really finished Clement's story." You nod slowly. "I think that's the point." She leans her head against your shoulder, and you sit there in silence, breathing in peat and candle wax and distant lavender. You realize something then. Clement wasn't the end. He was the middle. He was the fork in the road where failure met fascination. Echo is the continuation, not a better pineapple, not a prettier one, but a quieter answer to the same ridiculous question. Can we grow this here? Apparently, yes. Sometimes, if you're lucky, and patient, and willing to get emotionally attached to fruit that will almost certainly betray you. You drift off to sleep that night with the window open, and the sound of Ada's gentle scribbling in the next room. You dream of green crowns and storm glass, and a pineapple the size of a cathedral. When you wake, it's still just Echo, still ugly, still yours. The stove house has grown into its own little kingdom. Not a flashy one with trumpets and marble, but something humbler, more sincere. A realm of cracked pots, unlabeled jars, and fruit that probably isn't legal in most boarding schools. You're the monarch, of course, though Ada insists on being Prime Minister of Mold Prevention and will demands the ceremonial title of Compost Earl. The black pineapple, Echo, is now a proper fixture. It's ripening in slow motion like a sunrise narrated by a very shy poet. Its leaves have taken on a dusky sheen, almost purplish in the right light, and the body, lumpy and proud, is dense with sugars. You've stopped trying to impress anyone. You're just curious. One misty morning, you and Ada decide it's time. Not a grand harvest, no pageantry or punch bowl. Just the two of you in the stove house, barefoot, with mugs of absurdly strong tea. You run a finger along Echo's crown. It resists slightly, then gives. The fruit separates from its stalk with a quiet pop, like the universe clearing its throat. You cradle it. It's heavier than you expected. You weigh it on the cracked kitchen scale. It comes in just under 3 pounds, which means it's either very dense or very full of sarcasm. Probably both. Ada insists on slicing it open with her smallest knife, the one she claims cuts emotion, not just fruit. Inside, golden deep, not flashy or glowing, but warm, you take the first bite. It tastes like stubbornness. Not sweet exactly, not sour either. Earthy, complex, with a little bitterness at the back of the tongue that says, I made you work for this. You hand Ada a slice. She blinks, then grins. You did it, she says. Oh, we did it. And just like that, the tension you didn't even know you were still carrying, the fear, the old ambition, the ache of Clement, slips away. You put the rest of the pineapple in a jar, not for fame, just for tea breaks. Of course, word gets out, again. Miss Percival sends you a letter written entirely in plant metaphors. Will's cousin from London tries to buy the seed rights for an absurd sum. You decline. A French newspaper calls it La Revanche Agricole. Historians bicker naturally. Some call Echo a fluke, others a milestone. There's even a fringe theory that Echo is actually a hybrid seeded by a rare fungal mutation, though no one's managed to replicate it. You stop reading the articles. Instead, you host a small garden supper. Just a few friends, some candles, Ada's terrible fruitcake, and Will's accordion, which remains technically illegal in 3 counties after the harvest polka incident. As night falls, Ada toasts. To stubborn fruit, to old stories, and to making something beautiful even if it bruises you. You clink glasses. Yours is full of something bubbly and probably mislabeled. Tastes like dandelions and defiance. Later, under the stars, you walk the rows of the stove house alone. Everything hums, the air, the leaves, even the soil beneath your boots. You place a hand on the now empty pot where Echo once sat. You whisper thanks, not just to the fruit, but to the silence, to the waiting, to the ridiculous, patient hope that brought it all here. You leave the stovehouse door open that night. Let the breeze in. Let the scent out. Tomorrow, maybe you'll start on the pineapple that smells faintly of cinnamon, or the one that insists on flowering at night, or the one Ada swears can hear music. You don't rush anymore. Pineapples are many things, but fast is not one of them. Months pass, not in a blaze of triumph, but with the slow, crinkling grace of pages turning in a book you're finally not trying to finish too fast. The stove house settles into a rhythm. Morning fog, afternoon watering, the soft pings of glass cooling at dusk. It's less a garden now and more a biography, written in roots and temperate mistakes. You wake one morning to find Ada already at work. She's in the corner, elbow deep in a pot of suspiciously teal compost, muttering about potassium levels like it's a political scandal. "New batch," she says. "Hybrid from the Peru strain and that weird spiky one we'll found in a boot." You nod, any signs of sentience. Only mild sarcasm. Progress. Elsie's taken up embroidery again. Her newest piece is a cross-stitched diagram of pineapple varieties with tiny eyes added to each fruit for personality. You didn't ask for it. It's now framed above the tea shelf. Will, in a predictable burst of ambition, has started fermenting pineapple wine. You remain deeply skeptical, but the first sip tastes like ambition and mild regret, so accurate. And you write, quietly in the evenings, mostly notes, sometimes stories, occasionally fragments of memoir with titles like On Fruit as a metaphor for utterly avoidable mistakes and how not to impress an earl with agriculture. Miss Percival sends you a final letter. She's retiring. In it, she includes a clipping from a Parisian exhibition, a gilded painting of a stove house, modeled after yours. Echo sits front and center, exaggerated to an absurdly heroic size, as though it fed an entire rebellion. At the bottom, she's written, "They always get the shape wrong, but the heart, they almost understand it." You stare at the image for a long time. Funny how something that once meant pressure, failure, and colonial pretense now feels like home. Historians, of course, never stop talking. Some now argue that pineapples weren't just symbols of wealth, but tiny botanical revolutions. A fruit that broke class boundaries, inspired architectural absurdities, and forced the elite to get their hands dirty for once. Others think it was all a very expensive mistake, a fad. You suspect it was both. That's the thing about fruit. It doesn't care how symbolic you make it. It just grows. Sometimes when it feels like it. The stove house is full of ghosts now, but the good kind. Clement's old drawings, the stubborn first sprout, Ada's footprints in the ash from the day she returned. They linger, not as regrets, but as compost for memory. That evening, you finally open the sealed tin Clement left behind. You expect seeds or notes, maybe something heartbreaking. It's a spoon. Worn smooth, labeled in shaky ink, for the fruit that fights back. You laugh out loud. The kind of laugh that folds into something softer, grateful, tired. That night, a storm rolls in. Not violent, just insistent. Rain tapping against the glass panes, thunder rumbling like distant applause. You light a candle, grab a blanket, and sit by the stove house window. Ada joins you a few minutes later, dragging 2 mugs of tea and a slice of some unidentifiable jam tart. Outside, Echo's descendants sway gently. Some crooked, some defiant, some growing in directions the original Pineapple Council probably never approved. Ada leans on your shoulder. You still dreaming about pineapples? You nod, but less often. She smiles. Good means they're real now. And you believe her. You really do. And so here we are. The stove house is quiet again. The candles have burned low. The air is warm, still laced with the sweet ghost of fruit and damp earth. Outside, the storm has faded to a distant hush. You can almost hear the soil breathe. You've followed this journey from the clumsy beginnings of a single pineapple obsession, through powdered wigs, noble egos, and horticultural heartbreak, all the way to a small, stubborn plant named Echo. And somewhere along the way, the noise of the world slipped away. The pressure to impress softened. The fruit stopped being a trophy and became a friend. And you changed too. Just a little. You slowed down. You let things take root. And now, as you lie back, eyes half closed, the sound of gentle rain brushing the stovehouse roof overhead, you feel it settling. That sweet, strange feeling that maybe it's enough to grow something odd and imperfect, and let it be. So take a deep breath. Let the cool air fill your chest and ease your shoulders. Let the last traces of powdered sugar and pineapple marmalade melt into your thoughts. There's nothing to chase now. No garden to win. Just a quiet moment. A gentle night. And the comforting knowledge that even the most ridiculous dream, growing tropical fruit in England, can bloom into something beautiful if you're stubborn, kind, and just curious enough. Sleep well, Pineapple Whisperer.